All right, let's get this started. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Jennifer. Great to see you again. We're going to talk today about choosing an ERP system, especially for a consumer goods company and all the complexities that come into that with consumer goods products today. This is a 30-minute webinar. We will be recording it, and it will be on our YouTube channel at Soplino for you guys to see and share later. We also have a one-page handout, which gives you all the 5 mistakes that Jennifer sees, her tips for avoiding these mistakes, which is what we're going to talk about, and some information on Jennifer herself if you want to contact her, or you get interested in talking to her a little bit more. So with that, let's get into it. So quick intro, I am Michelle from Soplino. I'm your host today. Okay, different hair color and cut, but it's still me. Soplino is a company that provides fast access to manufacturing and supply chain experts like Jennifer. Jennifer is one of our esteemed experts. And let me just, okay, Jennifer, I'm going to take a second to introduce yourself here.
Sure, Jennifer White, CEO of the MJW Group, and we are a performance improvement and leadership development management consultancy. We specialize in many projects in supply chain, manufacturing, operations, and IT. And we look to improve the way projects are executed. We try to instill different change management principles along the way, as well as Lean and Six Sigma. And we also ensure that communication is key as these type of projects, like we're going to talk about today, ERP systems, are fulfilled.
All right, great, great. And where are you located, just to mention to people, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm located in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay, great. All right, so let's get into this. Choosing an ERP system, consumer goods, lots of SKUs that sometimes are coming in and out, right? Active, inactive, serialization, shelf life can be an issue, traceability of the product, many different brands, many different people managing the ERP system, right? So I know that you have put in a lot of these and you've seen a lot of projects for ERP systems and as well
Yeah.
as ERP uh, enhancements and bolt-ons and everything around that. So let's get into it. This format we're going to use today is your top 5 mistakes, which of course are fun to talk about, but more important, I think, for the audience is, what are you going to do to avoid those mistakes, right? So let's get into your first mistake that you see most commonly in these projects.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be what I like to call a needs assessment or discovery phase, right? Identifying who the key stakeholders are because
Yeah.
they are the ones that are ultimately making the decision around the implementation or the budget itself. So making sure there's a comprehensive interview that is done with key stakeholders. It could be those interviews can come many different ways. It can be one-on-one sit downs. When you get people talking, they'll start to unload a lot of things that's been locked up in their brains, right? Because they
Yeah.
don't necessarily document a lot of things. So usually when we're coming in, we're helping with that documentation, SOPs, process mappings, doing one-on-one surveys, and that ultimately generates a business requirements document, right? It
Yeah.
gives you that foundation to stand on as you continue in your search to know what to ask the vendor specifically
Yeah.
around their capabilities.
Now here, I think a lot of companies, and I know the mistake that that we had headlined for this one was not fully documenting the current state, right? That's what you see, right? And
Mhm.
here, do you see people just kind of making assumptions about what their colleagues need or do? And when they don't fully document it, do you see is it more about people not talking to each other? Or is it more about people not documenting then what people say and do?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Sometimes we see a lot of functions in a company, right? They're working in silos. So, they sit next to each other, but they don't really talk to each other, or they don't
Yeah.
understand how the work and the data progresses throughout the day. And then when you're putting all of this into a system, how does that look transactionally from a data standpoint, right? How do you materialize it can actually feel and see those things happening when it's on the, production floor, for instance. So yeah,
Yeah.
there needs to be more collaborative conversations around what the outcome needs to be in an ERP system and how people want them work to be defined.
Okay. All right, great. So let me go because I know we have your 5 tips, and then we're gonna have some time for Q&A also. So I want to make sure we get this all in. Second mistake that you mentioned was inaccurate ROI calculations. And
Hmm.
what do you see about that? And what do you think companies can or teams can do to avoid that?
Yeah, so sometimes consumer products organizations, they overlook the potential long-term benefits, and they tend to fail to consider like the indirect financial gains, or direct financial gains also that can result in an inaccurate ROI analysis. So it's a little sometimes up front, you don't really know. You don't know what you don't know, right? So you start
Right.
digging into, how deep do we want the ERP to handle our organization, or how much data is going to be involved? Are we going to have accounting, finance, supply chain, operations? Are they going to all be in there? And if they are, then what is the benefit that we're gaining by everyone being in one ERP system? So
Okay.
it really involves cross-functional teams to kind of evaluate what those both direct and indirect financial benefits are.
All right, great. All right, next one. Force fitting to current processes. This is one I have seen this in my own companies, many, many different companies in supply chain. People love to just bring in an ERP and basically they want to do what they're doing today faster, better, cheaper, right? So
Mhm.
what's your advice there?
Yeah, this is a little bit tricky, right? Because we get involved with talking about, okay, when I adapt my process, can you guys do that, being the vendor? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yes, we can.
Right.
However, we all know that there's a difference between out of the box solution versus a solution that is going to be highly customizable, right? A lot of times we don't realize how much customization is going to be needed, for CPGs. That impacts long-term costs, or it could impact your ability to scale later on if you start adding more
Yeah.
complexities into the overall business processes that you're handling every day. So it's kind of hard at first to understand what the unforeseen challenges are going to be like down the road, post implementation, like in year 2 or 3.
Mm.
But one thing I always recommend to avoid this is really going back to really number one in your business processes and understanding how much customization is going to be required. Even if you don't know what that is, I think laying it out on the table at first with the vendor and having those deep conversations avoids a lot of the, well, I thought we were going to get that later on, and you don't get what you really thought you were paying for.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Next one, underestimating user resistance.
Yes. So when we talk about adoption, right, in new ERP systems, as you just alluded to, your users, or your teams,
Yeah.
they want to do what they're doing in the new system, but
Yeah, right.
it should be set up the same way. So when we start looking at training and the change management of adopting a new ERP system, sometimes users are resistant to that, right? And they're slower to adopt what needs to be done. And there can be a lot of frustration if they're not feeling like they're getting heard, right? And
Mhm.
what their needs are with this new ERP system. So this is where you kind of have to get into your prioritization of, okay, this is a nice to have versus this is what we need necessary just to go live. So
Mhm.
there's a little bit of tug of war that happens here. I usually see when we get around this phase. But it's like I said, it's very key to keep the users in mind because they are the ones that are going to be utilizing the system day in and day out.
Yeah, yeah. Have you seen user resistance really be kind of the root cause for problems with ERP implementations? Does it go that far? Or is it do you see it more as just kind of a continual roadblock?
I see it more as a continual roadblock,
Okay.
most of the time. And I say that because eventually, if the users are loud enough, then the vendor can probably put something in place, or usually there's someone savvy enough on the team that can find a workaround to
Mm,
where they can live with it for now. And it doesn't impact any other decisions being made.
yeah, yeah. But I think it also goes back to your first point, right? Where you were saying interview widely, don't make assumptions. Have you talked to the users, right? Because
Right.
I think I've also seen, and you've probably seen this as well, companies that the decisions are all made kind of by the management team,
Hmm.
right? Because it's a big project and they don't want to bog the users are doing the daily business, right? It's done inadvertently, right? They just don't want to bother the users with a lot of project time.
Hmm.
Then when it gets to implementation, the users are then surprised by these new screens that they don't know how to navigate, and it's frustrating, right?
Yeah, and that's why that define phase, where you're doing a lot of the requirements gathering and having those conversations, as well as design, is really
Yeah,
important for some key users to be a part of.
yeah, okay. And let's go to the last one, which is your fifth mistake was outgrowing your system.
Yeah. We see this a lot, right? Hence why people are looking for
Yeah, right.
a new ERP system. But at the same time, you want to ensure that whatever is being put in place is going to sustain what you have as far as your roadmap goes, if it's 3 years or 5 years. Like really looking out into the future to understand what other capital type of projects are going to be impacting that ERP system because the data is housed within it.
Yeah,
So a good example of that is like increased transactions in a system. So I'll just talk about like, supply chain. If we decide to create a new distribution point, then there's going to be more recs coming in that ERP system on that side. So is the ERP system capable of handling that? Because it's going to be a lot of lift on the data setup of, new a new location,
yeah,
new customer data, new SKUs have to be added, so on and so forth, right? So thinking about things like that, you want to prioritize according to the company's, 3 to 5 year plan when it comes to projects like these, and make sure that you are holding that in the back of your mind. Like, if we grow with this system, what does that mean? Is it going to be capable of handling it?
yeah. And I know recently there's a lot of smaller systems, especially in CPG out there for small startups. Right? Because in the old
Yeah.
days, there was basically Excel and SAP and Oracle and nothing in between, right?
It's
That's
hard to
all,
believe
right?
Excel was doing a lot of this
It
work.
still is. I cannot tell you the size companies I still see almost completely on Excel. It's amazing. But when companies
Mhm,
do, what I have seen is in you're implementing these, right? Is these smaller ERP systems that are built around cosmetics or around fast moving consumer goods, where they let the company get into kind of an aspect of ERP. They're maybe not a full blown ERP, but like a partial
mhm.
ERP. And when you see those kinds of systems, what kind of runway do those have? Do you recommend them to clients that you go with like, I mean, everybody starts with Excel and whatever, a piece of paper, but
Yeah.
you go from Excel to a smaller system and then bigger from there, or if someone's growing fast, you try to get them on a bigger system kind of as soon as possible for that scalability.
Yeah, and in our experience, we try to get them on a bigger system, right, that they can grow with, especially
Yeah,
because of all of the automation, and now we have AI technology that's impacting what we can do better, faster, and
right.
cheaper. So in the instance of like demand planning, for instance, there's a lot of AI tools now that can do demand sensing, right? That
Yeah,
can help someone forecasting, to create a better forecast or to work with their their retail teams a lot better with what they plan to sell throughout
Yeah,
any
yeah,
time period. So
so
I think
important.
I always try to recommend, what can we automate? Because we have to now depend less on a person computing, and we have all of these
Right.
tools available to us to do that. So if that newer system or larger system has that capability, why not? And if the company has the budget, again, why not?
Yeah, yeah. And I think also that the transition, people underestimate the transition between systems. Right? So getting from Excel onto your first, let's call it a mini ERP or whatever, right? That's one big project. And then you're going to bring in a bigger size ERP and you got to go from that kind of mini ERP into that bigger ERP. That's another whole thing, right? It's not like the data just automatically, magically gets, transferred in cleanly every time,
Right.
right?
Right. There's a lot of migration to think about with your data. And usually, when we get into those conversations, is when everybody's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize we had this much data, right? Because now it has to be cleansed, it has to be validated before it goes into the new system. And then, even when it goes into the new system, there's the testing component that happens, right? Because you want to make sure that what I just put in this new system is working just like we used to do it in our old system. So I think some people forget about those two phases, about all the migration and all the testing that comes along with moving to a newer system.
Yeah, before you can be comfortable kind of going live and having customer transactions and orders on there, right?
Right. Right. You
Yeah.
want to make sure the system's working the way you want it to, because the last thing you want, especially for us in supply chain, is not to be able to ship product.
Yeah,
That is
right.
our number one goal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Zero disruptions. That's usually the goal for implementation. On
Exactly.
side. Yeah. All right, great. So let me pause there for a second and ask Jean, who's doing our facilitation today. Jean, are there any questions that are coming in from the audience?
Yeah, let me start with one question. What is a realistic expectation for timing to source and implement a new ERP system for a CPG company?
Mm.
And how can companies estimate that? Is it SKU counts or team size or revenue? How does one really realistically plan?
Yeah, if you're interviewing, like when you're going through your vendor selection, they typically will have a rule of thumb, right? Because they've had the expertise with, companies of X size, or these type of companies with, this many doors, or, the supply chain network is set up similar. Realistically, some ERPs can take 18 to 24 months. If we're talking about a full blown overhaul of an ERP system. But that it doesn't just start there, because there's a lot of thinking about, when to move to this system in an organization. So sometimes it could be longer than that. But when you decide and push the button and we're going into requirements gathering, I would suggest 18, give yourself 18 to 24 months to get to the finish line.
Now, does that include finding the right ERP system solution? Or is that once I've decided, okay, I'm gonna go forward with whatever X company?
That's after you decided, like, after
Ugh,
vendor selection, I would say
yeah.
18 to 24 months, yeah.
Oh, man, that's
Vendor selection could be 3 to 6 months, depending on, how many
yeah,
vendors you have in your queue that you wanna interview and,
yeah.
go through a couple of proof of concepts with.
Okay, and you recommend, yeah, what are kind of some just quick tips for vendor selection in terms of like, make sure you do the following?
Client reviews, being
Okay,
able, if possible, to interview their previous clients to get their take on, what went well during implementation, what would they have changed about the process of going through that implementation. But I would rely heavily on previous clients, and
okay,
then the capabilities that they are expressing to you, really challenge them with different use cases, right? And that's why I said it's so important during that process to really do a proof of concept, if you can, with the vendor, just to see if they can handle a small sample set of your data.
okay. All right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is often underestimated. right, that calendar, because that's it's a long time, right, to
It is a lot.
put
I
in
mean,
a
you got
system.
vacations in between, things happen, people
Yeah,
change roles. So that's what I'm saying. At least give yourself 18 to 24 months, or even a lot of times we've seen new roles have to be created. So you have to hire new people, right? Moving into this new system as well.
yeah, yeah. And that was a good question. And any other questions
Yeah.
from the group,
Yeah.
Gene?
Have another question. How do you measure
Ooh,
success
gosh.
in an ERP implementation? For example, what are the KPIs? Um, are they around acceptance or minimum number of go live problems? What should the team target for?
Yeah, so that can be very broad. It all depends on the change management plan, right, for that ERP implementation. So when we're talking about KPIs, it could be okay, we're moving to this solution because it's going to improve our on-time delivery. Say our on-time delivery is at 75% because we're limited by, how much data we can get through an existing system, and we go to this new system and now we're at 95%. Like the KPIs can depend if it's operationally. It could depend on the finances of the company as well, with cost savings of not having to have different IT vendors still support legacy systems as well. So there's some KPIs around financials and metrics that people look at as well. But then also productivity and uptime. So if we're having issues with certain systems because they're just not reliable and we decide to move to a new ERP system, and our productivity increases and our uptime increases because this system is more reliable than
Mm,
before, then that's another KPI that people look into as well.
mm.
Okay, that's great. Those are the questions that I have so far.
Okay, all right. Let me ask about where have you seen the biggest successes in terms of ERPs? I mean, these are all, I mean, if we turn these mistakes around, they're all kind of best practices, right? That we've
Yeah.
seen. But do you have particular examples that you think a company did an especially good job in implementation that you can give us? Or yeah, an example of something that you've actually seen that you'd say, you know what, other companies should really do exactly this.
Yeah, I would say especially when you start to become more global, it's a great use case for implementing a new ERP system.
Yeah,
One,
okay.
because you're functioning with different time zones, different locations. So I'd say once the complexity of, just speaking from supply chain, once the complexity of the supply chain starts to grow, and again, different time zones, different people,
Yeah.
different jobs having to run in the background at different times of the day, that's where I've seen ERP become very successful because ultimately, in my perspective, ERPs are one version of the truth. And like I said, when you start growing globally, you want to have that one version of truth, and everyone's working off of the same master data, customer data, transactional data. So having that visibility all at one time, no matter who logs into the system at any given point of the day, that's
Yeah.
golden.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's probably the biggest downside of running off Excel, right?
Right.
Excel does not talk to Excel, right? You can't get, right? So everybody walks into a meeting with 17 spreadsheets and none of the numbers match, right?
Right.
And finance can't get what they need, and the person running inventory has completely different numbers. Um, that
Yep.
misalignment is so wonderful to have once you have fixed it, right? And you have really that one version of the truth. But then I think another thing that comes up often is data quality on that, right? Because Excel, I mean, you own your own, I mean, everybody's got their own little spreadsheet and they're responsible for their own data, right? And they try to manage it. But once you're into an ERP system, I'm now in finance relying on the quality of the data from the
Correct.
supply chain team on the inventory counts and whatever, right? So have you seen,
Correct.
how do you how do you marry those two projects, and how do you keep or establish, I guess, good data quality while when you're implementing your first ERP system?
Yeah, this goes back to the step I usually see between once we get through define and we're coming a little bit off of design and we're getting ready to start validating
Yeah,
data. That's when data is literally like thrown on the table. Like this is all the data that we have. And it's on the ownership is on the business teams, right? To really validate that data. IT, we're gonna upload the data that you give
right,
us, right? And then
right.
we may be able to put in some fail safes to say, hey, there was 30,000 records last evening, and then this evening we only have 25,000 records. So we know there's a discrepancy, and we can go figure out where to find it. But it's still the ownership to me lies on the business teams to say, hey, this data is good quality data. We're analyzing it, I don't know, once a month or once a quarter. We're reviewing on the supply chain side. We're looking at inventory targets. We're looking at, our fill rates. We're looking at our forecast to clean up all of these areas that other functions may not be considering. So yeah, during the data validation phase, that's key when inputting a new ERP system, but also thinking about the maintenance post go live. There
Yeah,
needs to
yeah,
be like a maintenance schedule of data as well.
yeah. And that I guess connects with your comment earlier about maybe new roles, right? Is that
Right.
suddenly you need someone to manage this where before it didn't really get managed, or I mean, not that it wasn't needed to be managed, but it wasn't so crucial. Now it's really
Right.
crucial for data to be correct because everyone's tapping off it and using it for decision making,
So,
right?
Michelle, we have another question.
Yeah, great.
What are major red flags of an ERP system not working? Do
Oh,
you see
that's a good.
this issue being more of a lack of competency or proper selection of an ERP?
Both. Both. The vendor may not, this goes back to the beginning of your business processes and really challenging them to submit a proof of concept with you. That's usually where you can pick up on some red flags, and either they will tell you like, hey, we don't have the capability or the skill set to manage through your business process as is. So either the business process has to change or the vendor has to come up with a different type of solution. So that's where you start working with the solution architects, right, on the vendor side to come up with a viable solution that's going to work for your process. But sometimes you don't really know that until you get into testing. But I would definitely push back on the vendor to make sure they can meet your needs with their capabilities.
Mm,
Jennifer, I saw in one of our implementations, an entire team sidestepping the ERP to get writing processes that sidestep the ERP to get some ordering done. I consider that a red flag, a
Yeah.
major red flag. What other than sidestepping processes, what other kinds of red flags do you see as being really major that the ERP system isn't working?
Yeah, if the ERP system, like if, for instance, if it's a pretty standard off the shelf type of system, I don't want to name names, but
mm.
most of them have like a base, right, solution. If you find yourself veering too far away from that base solution, like you said, like there's too many exceptions just to make this work with our business process, that's where this red flag, because the technology should adapt to the business process. I don't think it necessarily needs to be the other way around, because that's when you start bringing in all this complexity about, well, we need to have somebody do X just because the system isn't working, and then we find ourselves manhandling the ERP system in reality where we thought it was supposed to bring ease to our daily functions. So yeah, definitely when it's too many exceptions to the rule, that's another red flag.
Okay, great. So we are almost out of time here. I want to thank you. This is fast. I could talk about this with you for like another hour easily, right? It's so interesting. And it's such a deep topic. I want to remind everybody that's watching, you can come to our website to download this if you're not watching this live with us. Anybody coming to the webinar live, I will send the one pager. Our team will send you the one page summary that Jennifer's top mistakes and her tips. This video is recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel. And if your company, if you're in the situation of looking at an ERP system or reevaluating the one that you have is not being sufficient, happy to introduce you to Jennifer and talk to you about how we can help you. So thanks again, Jennifer, for a great conversation.
You're welcome, Michelle. Thank you.